Hello everybody, good afternoon, and welcome to this second webinar that we are. I'm not sure if broadcasting is the right word, but whatever it is that we're doing it. I'm Martin Fautley.
I'm Daubney.
And hopefully the technology is on our side. Good-o. So at the moment you should be seeing a big title slide like what is on a piece of PowerPoint. Piece of PowerPoint? PowerPoint. This gives you the title of what we're going to do today. Now, it's quite important, I said earlier on that this is the second. One of the things that we're doing today is building on the first webinar when we look particularly at assessment. So we don't want to recover the same ground that we did last time, and hopefully the first webinar is archived on the website, so you should be able to see it. So we want to pick up some of the ideas from last time, develop them and take them on a bit. So our remit for today, the title is a bit of a giveaway, but let's just go over a little bit of what we're talking about. We're looking at progression, curriculum and assessment, but linked in with all that is the idea of attainment, because we do need to be thinking about how attainment feeds into all of these things. Our starting point has been very much that these aspects are all linked. And so what we want to try and do today is really unpick some of the linkages, think through what's going on, and talk through ways in which we can develop this.
So we're going to be coming up with some questions as we go through, quite a lot of which the questions in the first part of the session today are related around the idea of curriculum and what it is that you want from your curriculum and the influences on the curriculum, that kind of thing.
So one of the things that we're going to do, as Ali said, we're going to start with curriculum. We've got some reflective questions for you. And we're going to kick off with this one at the top. What do you value in music education? And this is a very, very significant issue, which is not necessarily one that many people in music education have thought about.
I've been doing quite a lot of work recently with local teachers about values in music education, and what is really striking is that it doesn't matter whether somebody considers themselves in a primary school, for example, to be a specialist teacher of music or a generalist teacher. Their aspirations and what they value in the music education are very similar to if you ask in a secondary school or if you ask instrumental teachers. And a lot of the values that people have been coming up with relate to some kind of broad, I suppose, overarching statements around access and enjoyment and lots and lots. Don't want to say too much, because actually we want you to go away and think for yourself about what is it that you value in music education. And it's kind of probably not a question that you can answer in 2 minutes, but certainly something for you to think about. We're interested to see how the values link with what's in your curriculum and how you actually assess.
One of the theoretical locations for this, because we keep wanting to link theory and practice, is the notion, we've spoken a lot in the past about theories in use and espoused theories. And so what the asking you to think about your values does is to really ask you to reflect on what do you value and what do you say you value, and how does what you say you value find its outworking in the reality of your curriculum. And there's some very interesting questions that people find when they start doing that exercise. So moving on to the second bullet point, what is the curriculum for music? Now this isn't quite as glib a question as you might think, because we've known for a long time about the idea of a hidden curriculum. What is the totality of a music curriculum, and what is on it, and perhaps just as importantly, what is off it? So what is your curriculum for music? How is it established? How is it written? How is it communicated? And from our first bullet point, what do you value, and how are those values contained in the curriculum, whatever we decide that is? And this takes us to our third bullet here, which is who decides? Because schools have a huge amount of autonomy now in terms of what's going on and what's going on in the curriculum. Who decides what is in and what is out? One of the things we'll be talking about in a while is how much time there is available, but what is on your curriculum and who has decided and where has that come from? So in thinking about that, one of the things that can be thought about is how much freedom do you have and how much freedom are you using?
The new national curriculum for music actually gives quite a lot of freedom, and the idea of the curriculum is that it frees it up so that it's locally appropriate to what you are actually trying to achieve. And so sometimes in the past there's been a few myths around, you know, you teach Gamelan in year 7, you teach African in year 8, and you teach Indian in year 9, for example. And it's obviously that's a lot less, but actually this is the opportunity for you to say, well, why do I teach that there? And is this the right place to have it, or do I need it? Am I missing something else instead?
And there's questions about why do you have it at all? So there's a lot of, as Ali said, a lot of myths. I always use the example, and many people have heard me talk about it before, from geography, about a geography inspector who talked to me about how he keeps seeing units on volcanoes, and then teachers say to him, but I've got to teach it, it's on the national curriculum. But then when you actually look, that word isn't there. So what is there, and what are the myths about what are there? How much freedom have you got, but how much are you actually using? And that takes us to the final bullet point here, which is about what do you publish online about your curriculum? Because there has been a requirement now for a while that schools publish this information on their website or some other public place. And so a question for the music department is, what is your curriculum? Back to that second bullet point. How much of that information is available? What do you tell people about your curriculum? And what actually is it? And how much do the parents and the kids know? What do you publish online? And this could well be a question that your school needs to think about and address.
So before we move on to the next slide, just to say that we quite like this to be an interactive session, as the last one was, and if you've got any questions that you want to put up, we will try and answer some of the questions today as we go along. So do keep using the chat function as well for that, and we'll see what we can do with that.
Indeed, and you'll see me and my varifocal squinting at the screen occasionally to try and read the 8-point fonts that your questions are coming up in on the left-hand side.
I'll be borrowing you looking on.
Okay, right. When I was young, I had a train set, as you can probably tell from this picture. So here is a picture of some train track. And this picture has been going the rounds. I drew it on the back of an envelope for Robin Hamilton when he came to see me. So there's an earlier version, which is certainly out there. But what I think that this train track does is ask us to consider the nature of what the journey is. What is the curricular journey? Now, I've drawn this train track for Key Stage 3, but it's equally applicable for Key Stage 2 as well. I wasn't very good at drawing a proper platform, but if you can see the little box above the train track says platform end of Key Stage 3, I'll talk about Key Stage 3 for the moment. This is the point at which the majority of the passengers are going to get off the train. And we'll talk about the statistics a bit more in a minute, but just as a spoiler, if 100 people get on the train at the start of year 7, when it arrives at this platform at the end of year 9, 93 people are going to get on it. There's only 7 people remaining who are going to go onto the top or the bottom areas that the set of points go, and those bits are further study towards GCSE and towards BTEC. The others are going to wait for another train that comes along that takes them straight through to other destinations. And so there's some questions about what does this mean in terms of the sort of little thought bubble up at the top, the curriculum and assessment strategy to get to this platform. In other words, what is the end point of the curriculum? Where are the high expectations? And how is this shown summatively? Now, in the past, we know that Key Stage 3 levels were originally designed only to be used at this point, haha, railway joke. But what is the point? Oh, sorry, I'll try and stop doing that. What is the summative assessment which is taking place at the end of this key stage, and what does it do? And interestingly, with the new national curriculum, schools, as it says in the one at the bottom, schools define what the musical skills, knowledge and understanding need to be here. And one of the questions, I've put it into that small speech thing, but you can change this to any way you like. What does a 14-year-old musician look like in this school? Maybe a better question that I should have written is, what do the range of 14-year-old pupils look like in this school? And you can change that to any age you like. But I think the important thing is, what are they like in your school? And I think that's quite important, because your school is not the same as the school 200 yards up the road.
I think something to bear in mind with the model also in the primary schools is that 100% of the children get on the train, and 100% of the children stay on the train once they get to Key Stage 3, because at that point, obviously, it's pretty much going on in most secondary schools, which is great. But that journey through Key Stage 1 and 2 looks very different depending on where you are and depending on who's teaching and the priorities which they're putting onto music. But I suppose the key points to take away from a primary perspective are that the children are still coming into your school with something from before, as they're coming into Key Stage 3 with an even bigger range probably of musical experiences. And the pathways which they're wanting to take from that are kind of, going to be very different. And the curriculum is one part of that, which we're going to be returning to a little bit later.
This is, well, it may or may not be of use, but it's quite an interesting prod for us to think about what is the nature of our train, especially for those, I don't want to pursue the metaphor too far, but those teachers in charge of the journey who actually decide in what direction the train is going. Now, these are some stats of entrance in 2013, and so these are just rounded to the nearest whole number. So for GCSE music, we know that 7% of entrants took, this is of entrance, notice, of entrants took GCSE music. In A-level music, 1% of entrants took it. Again, rounded to the nearest number. I've been trying to get the BTEC figures, but have failed to get them in time for today, for which I apologise. But the important point about these numbers is that they are very small indeed.
Somebody just for double comment actually says, "Well, that's grim," which I don't think I'm disagreeing with you about. But there is a lot bound up in this, and a lot of that is the value which music has placed on it by school systems, by parents, by what is a GCSE for, what is Key Stage 3 for, and there's lots kind of bound up in that 7% too. That's not to say that only 7% of children carry on with music somehow out at the end of
No, indeed, and these are examination stats, and it is quite important. Somebody just asked, how does that compare to other art subjects?
Art is about 40%.
Yeah, it's a considerable fraction of that.
Yeah.
And I think there are some issues for us, and as Ali says, we've got all sorts, and this isn't casting aspersions, it's just something for us to consider, because another question that arises from this is this one here, which is the same question in two different ways, which is, should Key Stage 3 music be preparation for GCSE or A-level, or A-level? And that question written the other way round, should GCSE and or A-level determine what is taught at Key Stage 3? Now, this is quite a pertinent question at the moment. There's a lot of talk about using this and GCSE becoming a 5-year programme in some schools, rather than 3 for Key Stage 3 and then 2 for the examination. I know that many of you out there have a telescoped Key Stage 3 and you only have Year 7 and 8, and they start their options in Year 9. But even so, it's an important question to be asking, because if 93 kids have got off the train, are we teaching those 93 things that really only 7 of them actually need? And if, in terms of A-level, 99 kids have got off the train, are we teaching the 99 things that only 1 child actually needs? So there's some questions there which are quite significant.
If you want to take that straight back as well to the idea of the values, what is it that you value in a music education in your school? Then there's quite possibly a mismatch between thinking that Key Stage 3 music is about training ground effectively for GCSE, and actually what you put down as your values, which are likely to be much more holistic. So it would be quite interesting once you've gone through that exercise yourself to see what you want. And as Martin pointed out earlier, what you put in your Key Stage 3 music is down to you. The choices that you make, the design of your curriculum is entirely down to you.
And these are questions which are exercising a lot of minds in music education at the moment, but I think there's some really important ones being asked there. So if we then think, what would happen, perish the thought, but let's just lob in a hand grenade, what would happen if music ended at the end of Year 9? If there was no examination music as a curriculum subject at all, what would Key Stage 3 look like if that was the point at which it ended? And so there's some questions there, because that forces us to to think about what does Key Stage 3 become if it is an end rather than a beginning, and that's a different way of looking at it. And then that gives us the very difficult question, which is what is the point of Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 music?
So recently I was using a video where I put up something from Glastonbury and just a crowd singing along, very well in tune, surprisingly.
Really?
Yeah,
Good.
very good.
Good.
But the point about that is, I asked the audience how many of those people in the audience at Glastonbury had got a GCSE in music, and the answer is approximately 7%. Now the point of that is that the 93% of the others are necessarily going on to be the musical tourists of the future and still want to develop a lifelong love of music in a completely different way. So if we were to completely take the Key Stage 3 Key Stage 4 out of the picture and think about Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 2 as a musical education in their own right, then what is it that you want to achieve? And today we're going to offer you a couple of solutions at the end, but actually I think the idea is that we're just going to ask you a lot of questions for you to actually go away and think about for that. Now somebody's put up here that the point of Key Stage 3 music is to offer students the widest possible introduction to music and being a musician, but it doesn't necessarily enable GCSE progression. You know, that's the kind of, these are the tensions which you're going to have to deal with depending on you know, what the priorities are that you want to kind of get. Do people who read novels get called literary tourists? Don't know the answer to that.
Yes, but I think one of the worrying things that happens is when people talk about progression a long way beyond that which they're going to do. So the point of so I suppose a big question is, what is the point of music education? What is it doing? And that really is going to be reflected in the sort of values that everybody has. And Ali said we're going to try and proffer some suggestions, but it's important that we keep bearing in mind that these have to be working for you in your school with your kids. And every context is different, and some are very significantly different from others. And so a one-size-fits-all approach, however well-intentioned, just ain't going to work. So I think we do need to be a little bit beware of one-size-fits-all approaches.
And if you look at the end of your track model, where that's starting to broaden out, actually what that's alluding to is that there isn't one solution for this. There's lots of solutions for different communities within your school.
So here's some questions that we're asking you to think about. What do you want pupils to learn and be able to do at various stages in your curriculum? Now that might seem entirely logical and almost a pointless question, but actually when we start reflecting on it, and I've differentiated learn and be able to do, because in both of our day jobs we're involved with PGCE students, and we know that they find it much easier to plan for doing than to plan for learning. But so what do you want pupils to learn and be able to do is actually turns out to be quite a difficult question, because you need to define them. And then, are these related to activities or learning? Now many years ago, when all this was fields and I first started teaching, you could buy books of resources that said you can do these in any order, and they were activities. Some of them were quite amusing, some of them were just wacky, but they were activities. And I'm not entirely sure what the learning was that was involved in these activities. But in a way, they persisted as a sort of folk memory of things which are good to do. But when we actually start to say, okay, but what are the kids learning by doing them? That's a very different question. And these can all be then taken to the point that really one of the things that we've said previously is the point of assessment is to try and get quality. So how is quality expressed in the activities which the kids undertake and in the learning which they do? So what is good? And that is one of the key issues for assessment. What is a good one? So whilst you're doing this, you're building your curriculum to account for pupils with different prior musical experiences, motivations and learning requirements, but how do you do that? Now, how homogeneous is your intake is a question that this arises from. And it also, somebody, I've now lost my very focal ability to see beyond the screen, somebody said this can depend on the links between key stages 2 and 3. Yes, indeed, Because one of the things that worries me is when I visit schools and secondary schools, and the music teacher says, "Oh, I assume they know nothing," and we start again. And I find this quite a worrying statement. Supposing you've got kids who've had whole class learning on a musical instrument, what's that going to do if you then assume that they know nothing?
Taking that back to primary school, recently I had an experience where I was in a primary school and they were singing really well in 4 parts. The secondary school teacher came down to the primary school, saw this happening. Of course, when they get to the secondary school, only some of the children are there and there are others, and it takes quite a long time again for that 4-part singing to be kind of re-established. So, there's quite a lot bound up in the transition thing. There's a different community of people that come through, but how do you keep the learning going of the children who could do that in their primary school?
Indeed, and knowledge of it is important. And somebody I noticed has just mentioned the hubs word, and so their involvement is going to be absolutely key in this. And so we do need to know this information, but I'm still going to worry about the secondary notion of starting from nothing if that's not going to be appropriate for everybody. Now, the next picture is very exciting and is very clearly an Ali one.
It's the cake. Hey! Right. Well, basically, we were thinking about the whole musical individual, and I just saw C. Matthews from Ipswich go past on the comments and say something along the lines of, what about their other musical experiences? And so something else for you to consider when you're designing your curriculum is what are the other musical experiences which young people are bringing to their musical education. So your slice of the cake, which is the one that's being eaten at the minute, the one that's missing.
Can I just say, lots of you are saying yum at this point, so there's a number of yum coming in.
So that slice of the cake that's missing is the Key Stage 3 music in the class, but actually most of the cake, which is the rest of their time, sorry I shouldn't wobble my hand around when I'm doing that, but they've got all of this other stuff going on. They're listening to music, they're learning, there's enculturation, and they're learning through just, kind of just being, really. They might be involved in wider opportunities, they might be going to ensembles, they might do hip-hop, they might do street dance. All of those things are helping develop some of the other musical skills which are going on. So our question really is, what do you know about your people you're trying to teach, whether it's Key Stage 2 or Key Stage 3, and so how do you take that into account? What are the foundations on which your curriculum is built?
And I dread to pursue the metaphor by saying, what do you consider the icing on the cake to be in terms of music education? But let's leave that question whilst lots more people are saying yum or denying they ever said it in the first place. Right, okay, say bye-bye to the cake. So, for example, do you have in your curriculum, whatever you decide that might be, do you have a statement, something like, at the end of Year 7 or Year 4, or choose any year you like, the normal expectation is that pupils will, and there's a few blanks to fill in. The normal expectation is that pupils will know, complete the sentence, be able to do, complete the sentence. Do you have that sort of statement which is written out as a big statement, and maybe doesn't have to be too long, but is your view as to what happens at the end of any given school year?
Now that could be a whole range of answers, because as we're talking about with the train track, what does a musical 14 or 11-year-old look like in your school? It's actually about the range of people. But I suppose from a primary perspective, again, just going back to the Year 4 part of this, or the Year 6 part, as they go through, they are developing skills, they're developing knowledge, they're developing understanding, and they're also developing the quality of what it is that they do. So how can you encompass all of this into some statements? And it just hopefully will make you think about, what is it that I'm trying to do? What is it I want them to know? What is it I want them to be able to do? What's reasonable in my school for children in Year 4? What's reasonable in Year 7?
It might also be the case that you think about having a range of statements of this nature. So do you have a view as to the sort of differentiated statements as well? Do you have, for the sake of normal, you can say the minimal, any phrases you like, but one of the things that we've talked about, has struck us, is that we tend not to see statements of this sort of nature written down in a curriculum. So when we start to think about pursuing curriculum, and organising them, then it's quite useful to be able to do that. And whoever's just said, can we have any experience too? It's your curriculum, they're your statements. We can have whatever we like in them. But do we have these big curricular statements?
And some of these might link back to the values.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of the things. An experiential thing actually could come up as part of what your values might be. What is it that you want them to experience?
Yeah, and these are all. And
somebody just put up is not. It depends on the cohort that the particular class that you realistically expect to achieve. Only you know that, and this is the point. You know, the problem with an off-the-shelf set of resources and set of expectations is it makes it sound like everybody should be able to do the same thing. Lawrence has just pointed out, though, the national curriculum says, quite controversially, should be taught to, which is actually not the same as being able to.
And there's a change from learning, yes,
but
indeed.
If you want to think about this in terms of what's best for music education for kids in your school, my suggestion is that you need to be thinking about the learning side of things. What do I want them to be able to do, know and understand, experience, all of those kinds of things.
This relates to the sorts of things that I was talking about earlier and we picked up since. And it's the linkage between understanding and doing. And one of the things that we have in music education particularly is we have different notions of what understanding and doing are. Now, in music education, I venture to suggest that we want the kids to understand things, and the way they understand them is evidenced in achievement. In other words, they can do them. But in order to be able to do them, they've got to practice doing them, and so they learn by doing. Now, the reason for putting this in at the moment is that both of us are getting a lot of inquiries from teachers who are talking about ways in which their school is imposing what learning looks like. And one of the ways in which learning looks is that learning only exists when it's written down. And this can be a bit of a problem for us in music education. So let's take a very simple example, that we're doing some singing with some kids. If the learning that they do is only instantiated by what they've written in their books, then the point of singing becomes relatively pointless. We don't go and watch public performances of anybody singing and expect them to write an essay on what's involved. We actually want to go and hear the music. And the same is true for kids. So if people are being forced into an evidentiary requirement by the school to say, show us what they learn because what they learn is in their books, this is deeply problematic for us in music. The phrase that we've used long time is teaching music musically. We also want to think about assessing music musically and musical assessment being used for musical learning. And so I think it's quite important that we think about these. And it may well be, and I've noticed that the sidebar on the left has suddenly gone wild with people talking about how this is the case for them. But this is a real problem for us at the moment. And so I'm raising this to say that for us, we think that understanding in music is evidenced in achievement, in musical achievement. It's not necessarily evidenced in the writing that kids do. And so that's a very significant way of thinking about things.
You also need to think about the value of talk and what it is that you get from that. Now, Jackie's just put up something saying we must fight meaningless assessments. Musical assessments happen in the moment, which is absolutely the case. You know, the best teaching is where it's kind of, you know, the teachers changing their role, jumping in and out, got lots and lots of strategies to be able to do that. What I'm generally finding is that secondary schools are much more demanding on that than primary schools in what they want, which is great for primary schools, so long as people are clear about what it is, and it's not a nice set of activities, but the knowledge, skills and understanding. But the writing down of stuff doesn't seem to be so prevalent.
And this is important for secondary schools if it becomes the case that the only form of learning that is acceptable is written forms of learning. And so we do need to think about this idea of doing and understanding. So here's a question: how do you plan your curriculum? How do you plan your curriculum? Now, not thinking about examination group curriculum here, because in an examination group, clearly you use the bottom model. You work back from what the assessment's going to be to plan your curriculum. But at the key stages 2 and 3, you are to some degree in control of your planned curriculum. So do you plan the curriculum and then assessment derives from this? Or do you think about what you're going to assess and then plan the curriculum in order to meet it? Now, I remember when the last national curriculum came out, I think it was, I was involved in some of the rollouts, and we were talking to groups of teachers about it. And I remember very clearly one teacher saying to me, oh, the assessment hasn't changed, so I don't need to bother changing my curriculum. And that really wasn't the point of the last iteration of the national curriculum, because the idea was that things had changed. So what is it that changes? What is it that you're assessing? What is it that you're planning? And what is it that you're doing with the kids? And does assessment arise from this, or does your curriculum arise from the assessment?
We've got some questions for you. We were thinking earlier about if you teach music for half an hour a week, you're likely to get about 15 hours over a year. If you're fortunate enough to get 2 hours a week, you're going to get around 60 hours over the year. And so it's kind of no surprise that each school is thinking about what is the curriculum in their school, and when you get to secondary school, there's going to be a huge disparity almost, I suppose, really, between the music education, which some people have, which is going to be much richer than other people. So thinking about the time that is available for music education in your school, however many hours that is across the year, if you think about it in that way, how can you work out what it is? What are your priorities? Because, you know, we were saying earlier, you're in charge of this. You need to decide, if you've only got 15 hours in the year, what are your priorities for that year? What is it that you want to do? The second question is about the coherence. I'm going to pass on to Martin because that links very nicely to the third point.
Yes, I've written in the past, and I'm sorry to bore people rigid, but some curricula I see are what I've called a cook's tour of cultural styles, genres, traditions, and the great composers. And it strikes me that the learning activities are identical. So I don't wish to be overly rude, but I will be. So I've seen curricula where we have a unit on, say, gamelan, where we play gamelan on tuned percussion, and we make up our own gamelan piece and we perform it to everybody else. And then we move on to samba, sorry, I should be going that way. We move on to samba and we play some samba on the same instruments that we just play gamelan on, by the way. And then we make our own up, and then and so on. And we end up moving through a whole range of things. And basically, we do the same set of activities, but in different culture styles and genres. And it does remind me of that Cook's Tour thing of, if it's Tuesday, it must be Venice, when that's what happens, and we wander around Venice being overawed, and then if it's Wednesday, it's Belgrade or whatever. And so some curricula end up looking like that. And so the question that I'd like for us all to reflect on is our curriculum, are our curricula coherent, or do they do this sort of Cook's Tour thing? Of touring through a variety of various bits and pieces. And then related to that goes back to the things that we keep talking about. How does your curriculum in and of itself evidence progression? Now, if you do the Cook's Tour mode, it's actually quite hard to evidence progression, because what happens is more that you accumulate breadth rather than depth. Now, we don't have a problem in saying that we need to think about accumulating breadth. But curriculum by accretion, in other words, we've done this, 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 and this, but we've done the same thing in this, 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 and this, might not necessarily, in the phrase in italics, in and of itself, evidence progression. And so this then links to the last bullet on this slide, which is curriculum planning undertaken holistically or atomistically? In other words, is it all thought about together, or do you have a sort of a frame in which you have lots of spaces the same size, and in many schools I go to, that's about 6 weeks, in which you drop a 6-week model and then go on to another 6-week model, and then you shuffle them around a bit. So is curriculum planning undertaken holistically or atomistically?
Katie just put up a point about that they use different units of work. I think this is what you're saying, Katie, but each topic focuses on something different. But that shows us that you've actually thought out what is the knowledge, skill and understanding. Rather than it just being a nice set of activities, it strikes me from reading that you've actually thought out what is the learning that you want, and you can probably articulate that to me if we had a conversation about that.
And it also means that you've thought about what order to do the units in, rather than just say, well, I'll do this unit here and I'll do that unit there, with no particular thought about it.
Oops, sorry. Don't ever let me play with the technology, Martin. Right. and going back to that very point, actually, if you have to publish your curriculum online, what do you consider your curriculum to be? Is it that you put up a grid that says we do samba, we do reggae, we do this, we do that, we do the other? Or is your curriculum around the learning goals, the aspirations, the targets? Which of those is it? And actually, I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know what it is the expectations of schools are. But I certainly know that a few that I've looked at recently, all they have really done is they've just named the Cook store. So I've got no idea. I'm kind of sitting behind that, whether they're, what the learning behind that is. And so, I mean, I suspect that a lot of people who have joined us today are probably preaching to the converted, really, that have thought about what are those things that that you're trying to do. So somebody says here, I've put up the national curriculum. Okay, so what is that? How do you? It's a little bit like saying I put up the GCSE syllabus, but how do you kind of get to that? In fact, the GCSE syllabus, in a way, is more defined than the national curriculum.
And there's some, and this is an ongoing thing, and we genuinely don't know much about this, and we don't know much about it yet. It'd be interesting to see how many schools haven't done it yet either. That would be quite a useful thing. Okay, here's another difficult question for you. What is a unit of work? Now, I know that you might not call it a unit of work, it's a scheme of work or a program of study. Insert your own phraseology here, whatever you call a unit of work. And here's some questions. How is it defined? This sounds obviously in a very serious mode when I wrote this, by contingent fixed length. In other words, like I said earlier, it's got to be 6 weeks. This is sorry, that's the second one. That's arbitrary fixed length. Contingent fixed length is you have a carousel or you have multiple simultaneous timetabling. So 2 Year 7 music classes can't do the same thing at the same time. You have a carousel. They're about to go to drama. So that's going to happen. Is it an arbitrary fixed length? You don't have a carousel or simultaneous timetabling. You've just decided for some reason all our units are 6 weeks long. Do you define it by attainment? So when the majority are ready, move on. So you might stay doing it for a while because that's what happens. Or you might whiz through it and think, right, we're on to the next one. So what are the reasons that you do it? Do you have, and some schools I've seen do have different lengths. They have some which are longer than others. So what is the unit of work in your school and how is it defined? And the questions relate then to what are the reasons for doing that. So there's some sanity, just written. Yeah, okay, fine. But so in order to stay sane, but what are the reasons? Why are your units this length and not that length?
Is there any flexibility in that?
Yeah,
so that once
absolutely.
you start going through a unit of work, if they're really flying with it and it can go off in lots of different directions, do you actually have to stop it at the point of the end of the 6 weeks because it's half term? Probably you're going to say, yes, I have to do an assessment lesson.
Yes, that's right, yeah, so I've got to do an assessment lesson.
Right.
So some questions just to be moving on with. For you, and these are takeaway questions. For you, what are the key knowledge, skills and understandings for this? And there's a notion of threshold concepts. If you don't know what a threshold concept is, have a look on the interweb, Google it, because there's all sorts of interesting things in order to look at this. It's currently a trendy topic. What do kids need to know before they can progress on to the next thing?
So that's ever so difficult with music because it's not necessarily a linear pathway.
Oh, absolutely.
No. But it may be that you're being asked to define some of this stuff, in which case you probably need to think about the big parts of this and what they might actually be. So,
in a way, we've sort of talked about this. So once you've decided upon them, you need to place them into a sequence. And this actually, there is some like I'm just doing now, there's some head scratching that needs to go on here. What do you put where and why? And how, over the course of time, the knowledge, skills and understanding accrete in order to be able to build up to your curriculum. So there's some questions that we can ask you to ponder on.
And there's a few more here. This is about what are you going to do to get everybody to this point? The thing about music, building on Painter's ideas, we talked about a little bit last time. This music is for everybody thing. And within that, you've got a massive range of people. So what are you going to do for everybody regardless of the experiences, special educational needs, all sorts of things that are kind of bound up with that. And again, you know your kids, and that's kind of the bottom line. Really, you need to.
And threshold concepts obviously rings a bell for somebody, and I can't read their name. What's their name? Because they put a web link up. I have no idea what the web link is taking to you. It might be a picture of another cake, but there it is. So, framework for planning and defining curriculum, assessment and progression.
We showed this last time. It's part of the document which Martin and I'll just plug this a little bit. It's also on the ISM website. We came up with this framework and it works for all sorts of things. It also, as well as working across a kind of a whole year, will follow across just for a unit of work, for example. So when you're thinking about unit of work, what is the singing, the playing, the improvising, the composing, the listening, the social stuff, whatever it is you want to have down there, what are the skills that you want? How is it that you're going to get to those? What's the knowledge and understanding around that? And then how are you assessing? Now this can work on a macro level with a kind of whole unit or a year. Can also work on a micro level with a unit of work or even within individual lessons. So we talked about that quite a lot last time, so it's just a revision. So
and it's also important to say that if, like me, you can't read a word of it on the screen, you're actually better off to go and download it from the ISM website when it does actually become readable.
Okay. So, pressing to progression, Martin.
It was almost a joke, but it's obviously not that amusing because nobody in the room is rolling around laughing. So here's some questions. These are the aims in the national curriculum, and each time the national curriculum has been produced, it seems to have got shorter. So we can now get the aims on a single PowerPoint slide. Oh, it's jumped. Excellent. How did you do that, Ali, without even touching it? That was stunning. There we go. Right. So those are the aims. What is there that can progress in those? And there's some interesting questions in there. I don't want to insult your intelligence by banging on about the national curriculum. And I'm also aware that for many, in fact an increasing number of people, the national curriculum is disapplied from the sort of school that you're in. So there's some questions about what can progress. Hello, it's now not progressing at all for me.
Are we frozen? Somebody said sounds disappeared. Oh dear.
Not responding.
We've lost a few people.
Oh, we're back. Oh, we're back.
Yeah.
We're back.
Are we back?
Hello, we're back. We had
Yes, hopefully we're back. Somebody tell us? Yes, we
Yes.
are. Thank you, Steve Matthews from London.
Thank you.
Excellent.
As a Mac user, I can say it's because we're using a Windows computer. That's clearly what the problem is. So I'll eat my words next time. It'll be made to do it on a Mac and it'll be dreadful. We have the interrelated dimensions, formerly the elements of music. I was talking about this in Kent recently. Big shout out to Kent teachers. And somebody said to me, yeah, they call that the Star Trek approach because it's interdimensional. So we've now got the Star Trek music curriculum with these interrelated dimensions. So a question that we can ask ourselves is this. Is it to address each of these separately? Oh, the mic button's flashing at me. What does that mean? If they are truly interrelated, what does that mean? And how does it match with the threshold concept planning we talked about earlier? And
also, is it helpful to atomise them? You know, in that way, there's lots of other things which you can pick up on within the curriculum document.
We call them the IDOMs. Oh, I see. Right, got it.
Okay.
I had to think about that. Why has somebody written Tiddly-I-Po?
Not sure.
Okay, that's the Lagoon Show song, isn't it? Right, okay, thank you. So, progression. Here's some ways to think about progression. Progressions in curriculum planning, progression in arrangement of learning materials, and progression in pupil attainment. And so, we're giving you a lot of questions today, so you're certainly getting value for money. How do 1 and 2 facilitate 3? So in other words, how do the progressions that we've been talking about in curriculum planning find their outworking in the ways in which pupil attainment is achieved? So here's the question. How can assessments measuring attainment be used to demonstrate progress? This is, I think, the one that has caused certainly Key Stage 3 teachers to lose a lot of sleep over the years, because we can measure attainment Now, whether we can do it terribly well or not is the subject for a totally different webinar, but we can certainly endeavour to measure attainment. But what do we do in order to demonstrate progress? Is progress, and perhaps we could think about STEAM doing this, is progress the speed at which we move through the various attainments, or do we need to think about progress as a separate aspect? So are the overarching curriculum goals a starting point for progression measurement? So are those big statements that we talked about earlier on the points at which we should be using to think about progression, and we build up the little nitty-gritty unit by unit assessments to feed into those? And if so, how do these find their outworking in individualized day-to-day assessments? So what do we do in the classroom that feeds in to our understandings of
and
progression?
who are you trying to demonstrate the progression to?
Yeah.
That's another interesting point. You know, is this just for the system? Is it a bunch of data that the machine is sitting behind actually chewing, or is it something that you can demonstrate progress and show or get people to recognise the progress for themselves, which kind of comes back to Roger's point here. I'd rather we talked about progress and achievement.
Yeah, although achievement is a weasel word in the way that it's used to mean different things. So we do need to distinguish between attainment,
Lawrence's
progress,
point,
and progress.
seemingly in entirety of a requirement of the system. Yes, it probably is a requirement of the system. What we're trying to move this towards, though, with this assessment, progression, curriculum conversation is, okay, sometimes the system is so inflexible that there is not much you can do about it behind that. But actually, one of the most fundamental things about driving learning is about developmental progression, feedback, that kind of stuff. So maybe there's like lots of stuff around this, and I've just put something up actually on the ISM website around some strategies which you might use, which I'm sure we'll get into at another time.
So one of the points, and Ofsted have made the first point a number of times, is the idea of what is evidence in music. And we talked about this earlier when we talked about writing. And it sounds so silly to say music should be musical, but there was a headline in the newspapers about the time of one of the Ofsted reports that said music lessons aren't very musical. And so there's the question there about what is it? Music should be musical. Yeah, well, yes, so music lessons should be music. What this does mean is that music exists as sound. And this then takes us to the problem, and I'm terribly sorry to have a bit of an SLT bash, and I get told that every time I do this by SLTs, but for some SLTs, so I put the word some in, require learning to be evidenced only in writing. And there's the idea of the book trawl and the learning walk. And we do know that Ofsted dispute in music that learning is evidenced only in writing. And as Jackie Schneider said, if music should be musical, then so should assessment. Absolutely. Music should be musical. Musical assessment should be musical as well. And we do have some problems in terms of book trawls and learning walks.
So Ofsted say, and lots of other reports have also said across a long period of time now, it's really about music existing in space, you know, in time, if you like, that we need to be able to capture that. And so the use of audio recording, but not just sticking it on as it was, you know, tapes or CDs or whatever has been historically done, is shoved in a drawer. It's how can you use those to get the work better? This quote that is on here from 2009, it is good to record our work, but it would be better if we could listen to it and find out how we could improve it. So how can you use the audio recording as part of the kind of diagnostics process, I suppose? And I know that there is sometimes issues with video recording, but actually that shouldn't be the same with the audio recording, so it should be okay in that sense. And
it's important. I have come across instances where it's only used for summative assessment purposes and the kids never listen to it. So I think that's the point of what this kid is saying here. So here's some questions for your SLT. And the first one is a really important one. How can musical progression be evidenced if not through music? So that's very significant, and that really is, I think, worth asking when people are being asked for written evidence. How can musical progression be evidenced if not through music? And this is musical progression. This is the ways in which the kids have progressed musically. Then, just to go and have a theoretical moment again, not all knowledge is declarative, some is procedural. Do they being SLTs, recognise this, that we do have the idea of procedural knowledge. And procedural knowledge is obviously very significant in music because it involves doing. Do SLTs recognise that? Because declarative knowledge is the one that's going to be evidenced through declaration, through writing, through text, through speaking, although I suspect speaking isn't quite valorised as much. But procedural knowledge is very, very significant. Somebody just said, oh, it's Jackie, I imagine SLT will say, I don't care, just write it down. But this is the problem for us. Do they say this in PE as well?
We are trying to shift the conversation on from the recognition of having to subdivide levels, etc., and think about strategies which are useful for making musical learning better, I suppose is the word. So we've been thinking quite a lot about the terminology that comes with this. Is it formative assessment? Well, the word assessment sometimes gets in the way. So we've knocked the assessment word out the middle and gone for formative strategies. But it's just another question for you to think about. But within your own teaching, how important are the formative strategies that you use to help the learner and to help you as a teacher? Because that, in essence, is what the formative developmental stuff is about. Now, on the ISM website, national curriculum page, I think right at the very bottom, Rebecca might put a link up for us if we're lucky. Just a hint. I've recently put up a list of, I don't know, about 40, 50 strategies, which are just things, I keep adding to it actually, which are things that you might want to go through and highlight and go, yeah, I do that and I do that, but I don't do that, you know. So what are the formative strategies that you use and how important are they to your teaching? Because for me, the bottom line is that brilliant teachers are the ones that do what Jackie's just said, that music teachers are brilliant at formative assessment. Not all of the music teachers that I see, sadly, are brilliant at formative assessment. Sometimes they're too bound up in getting to the end of something. Getting through it is more important than actually the learning that's coming from it, and that kind of drives the learning. And so the formative strategies are kind of left behind. So we're going to start looking towards formative strategies with the few minutes that we have left. Thinking about, we know that we've got a massive amount of different learners in a class. There's a huge amount of differentiation needed, and of course you know the children in your class better than anybody else. And that gets more and more developed, that knowledge, as the year goes by. But how does that link to your differentiation? Is this a way that you can fight with your SLT to say, no, actually, I'm doing something here which is about driving musical learning, and kind of showing the nuances of how you do that, and being aware of what you do?
And really to think about, as you'll notice, we keep talking about formative strategies. There is a quote from Dylan William, one of the sort of fathers of formative assessment for learning, that he says, I wonder what would happen if we didn't actually call it assessment. And I think this relates to whoever it was. I think it was Jackie Schneider who said music teachers are brilliant at it. Well, yes, they were, and were doing it before it had been invented, but then people from other areas came along and told them they were doing it wrong. And I think that's the point at which the problem arises. So I think we need to go back to thinking about the idea of formative strategies and disentangling some of those ideas from the ways in which we think about this and pupils' assessment. And yes, Katie, we do need more music teachers in SLT. You're quite right. And interestingly, when we do have music teachers in SLT, these are the people who get it.
And taking Etienne's point there, which has just moved, general class teachers in primary sometimes actually don't understand. I always say, well, I'm giving them between 3 and 6 hours of training. It's no surprise. And I guess a big part of the music coordinator's job, actually, and it's the hardest part, is to give people confidence and to be able to go and do something, but also to help them to understand what it is that they are trying to do. And lots of primary teachers are brilliant at using formative assessment in other areas of the curriculum. It's how can you bring that forward into music?
So here's some questions. Again, we said there's lots of value today in terms of the questions. What range of strategies have you used? And I really do recommend you go and look at that link that Ali just talked about. Rebecca's managed to get as far as writing www.
Yay.
So the start is getting there. In terms of what range of strategies have you used to do all these things here? Because as Jackie said, yes, music teachers are good. They can do these. But where do they figure? And this goes back right back to the very head of this presentation when we talked about espoused and in use. Yes, we can do them, they are used, but are they actually being done? So we really do need to ask people to think about those.
We'll just put something down quickly about intervening in the process, which is very much related to formative assessment. Just to kind of think when you're going around, why do you intervene? How have you intervened? There's lots. I mean, musical teachers talk about intervention quite a lot, actually. And is it intervention that's worthwhile from a learning perspective, or are you just trying to hurry people along to get to the end of the unit because there's something going on next week? So that's another thing which kind of is related to how long is your unit of work, how flexible is the work, and all that kind of stuff. So
I was doing these, I discovered, looking back on my records, I'm so old, I started teaching in the 1970s, you'll be shocked to hear, and I used to borrow circular graph paper from the maths department and chart pupils' attainment and progression across a range of axes by pencil and using things called French curves, which are nowhere near as pervy as they sound, when you join up the dots between various aspects. All of this is now done automatically for you on Excel, and it's much easier. And so what this is a radar chart, I think Excel calls it, or people call them web diagrams or spiders, something or others, all sorts of things. And so what's going on in this is that this is a hypothetical example of ways in which the various axes show points upon which you can chart progression. Now, it's merely an idea, and it's been around for a long time. And as I say, I was doing it on circular graph paper by using bits of paper. It was also used, David Ashworth used them in the musical Bridges project. They've been used in all sorts of ways and all sorts of places. But it's a different way of thinking about ways in which you can look at, chart, and record across a range of domains, or whatever you want to call them. And these are just ones that I sort of plucked out of a notional school curriculum in order to be able to do. And so it's simply a suggestion of alternative ways in which you can think about charting and showing progression. And
if you overlay them, you can see the progression
over time. You can, as the it's usually called a kite shape. It doesn't look anything like a kite on that one, but as the kite gets bigger.
I want to show you another way here, handwritten around the outside. I've been using this for quite some time, and it's based on the theory of personal constructs, where you get people to decide for themselves. So it's kind of the opposite side, but the two things go together. Martin's is about what the teacher thinks and against a set of milestones. This is based upon, this one in particular is, what do children of, this is from a year 5 class, it's just the start of one, what do they think makes an excellent singer? And I'm going to put up some instructions on how to kind of do this and go through all of the steps. But basically, what you're asking people to do is to think about what all the constructs are. And of course, everybody's going to come up with something different. And there might be some commonalities, like the one about confidence often comes up. And so if excellence is 10 around the outside, when you get to 0 in the middle, you get them to think about what's the opposite of what it is. You know, if singing in tune is, or singing really well in tune, or communicating with your audience, or looking up when singing, one of them puts. So looking up when singing, well, what's the opposite? Well, it's looking down and mumbling. So where do you sit on that? Actually, I'm only about 2 out of 10. Okay, so what do you need to do to get to 3? We'll come back to this chart at a later point, and we'll see what progress you've made. So you make them kind of think about what it is that they are trying to achieve. There's loads and loads. Thank you, Greg. They're exceptional at uncovering what students know and gain access to hidden knowledge. That's my co-author. And they are absolutely amazing for generating conversation and for giving the ownership of the whatever it is you're trying to get them to think about back to the person who's actually thinking about it. I have to say the youngest I've done this with is year 5. I've done a lot in primary schools in different ways, and it's always been really, really successful. My favourite is say it, not spray it. for what you need to be an excellent singer. But you know, there's lots and lots of stuff in there about tuning and posturing. You don't have to tell them. That's the thing, that people work it out for themselves. You know, children are very, very articulate, and you see some musical skills coming through, you see some social things coming through, and it just shows the depth of understanding which they have of what they're trying to achieve. And it also quite often gives you an indication of how confident somebody is themselves. And will also let you as a teacher what you may have left out. The thing about letting them choose for themselves is it's personal to them, and that's extremely important. So there will be some instructions coming up, but hopefully you can see that if you put together the radar charts, which Martin was talking about, which track the different aspects over time, and then you've also got this from a pupil's perspective, which could be about a musician over the year. It gives you an idea about personalising learning. It helps you to map what it is that they want to do. It helps you to see kind of what they've got in there and what's in and what's out. And crucially, it helps them to decide for themselves if they need to improve something, then what are the actual strategies to be able to do something. And it's a very constructive way of making something very real to kind of move on with.
And that's important, and as is the notion of trying different things out. It's coming up to the end of our allotted time, so we really are drawing to a conclusion now. We hope that we may have stimulated you into thinking about a variety of issues. I certainly know from some of the comments on the left that we've certainly irritated some people. That's good, that's fine, yeah. Because positive irritation, the pebble in the shoe, is always a spur to change. And there's been a lot of discussion about the role of hubs and what hubs can do and what hubs should be doing in terms of what's going on. But the final issues for all of these are going to rest and are vested in the teachers in the classrooms. And so I think we really hope that if we have been even slightly helpful, then that's been a good thing. So thank you for whatever you've been doing, watching, listening, audiating, participating,
lip reading,
chatting, lip reading, drooling over the cake, all those other behaviourist principles of learning. And that's really, really nice. And although you've seen me squinting at the comments at the side, it is nice to know that they're actually going on. And don't eat all the cake. Oh, I don't know about that. I think that's good. So
I will forward you. Rebecca. Obviously, the slides will go up on the ISM.
She just said so. Look, there's a message from Rebecca.
I will forward a blank polygraph if that would be helpful, just so that people can use it without having to work out how many primary spokes and how many secondary spokes, etc., etc.
Yes,
that it would have. So I'll put that up for you as well, and some instructions will be coming with that shortly too.
Absolutely.
It's a preview today.
Okay, so tune in for further developments at some unspecified point.
Thank you, James.
In the future. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, got a lot of buys coming at the minute.